know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers, and welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I am your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley. And weighing in at 230 pounds. You draw out the what's up, posers.
Yeah, Michael Buffer action there, yeah. Oh, welcome to Punk Lotto Pod, the show where we choose one year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year to discuss. And today we are talking about an album released in the year 1995, and we will get into more of that. But first, if you head to patreon.com/punklotopod, for $1, you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio, where last week we only did a News of the World because we didn't have enough music we listened to do an I'm Listening.
Yes. Christmas depression combined with, excuse the sound of my cat falling down. Combined with your not wanting to double dip on content because you listened to mostly stuff that you talked about.
Yeah. A lot of stuff I listened to was getting ready for the best of 2025 content, so I'm using that for other audio, but, you know, I didn't listen to a lot of other things, really. I probably had like 5 or 6 things I could have talked about, and that would have been like, that's the minimum I need, but even then, it wouldn't, I don't know how long we could have gone on it. But yes, so we just did a News of the World where we talked about the news stories of the last week, as well as what we've kind of been up to in our personal lives, and updates on major awards, bands, shift, and my new part-time job. So we'll see how that affects the scheduling, but we'll see. But at the $1 tier, you also get access to the first episode in the Best of 2025 content. As of recording, we have already released the biggest disappointments of 2025, and I believe I should get the best songs posted before this episode goes up, so I'm going to do a top songs of 2025 as well, so be on the lookout for that, and I'm going to do all the formats after that. I believe it's reissues, live albums, and compilations. Then I'm going to do demos, then splits and singles, and wrap it up with EPs before we do the album episode, probably the first week of January. But yeah, a lot of content coming your way. Honestly, December is like the most value for your dollar month because I just do a ton of audio, usually that whole month. So it's usually solo, but we do our weekly regular bonus audio. You can sign up at our $5 producer tier, where that gets your name said on the show every single week. Shout out to our producers, Dave Brown, writer of the newsletter Oklahoma Lefty, and my co-host on Bookenders. Shout out to Jason W., writer of the newsletter Songs About Chocolate and Girls. Shout out to Zach in Oregon, and shout out to Steve Long, host of the podcast Rebel Nerd Radio. So lots of content there. Oh, also, $5 tier gets you access to our once-a-month exclusive poll that determines the bonus audio that we do. We do a once-a-month EP-focused episode, so we will be doing Swizz with Dave on one of those this month. And then you can sign up at our $10 tier, where you get to choose the album we devote an entire episode to. So all that is at Punk Lotto Pod on Patreon. All right, let's get into it. 1995 is what I believe, Dylan, you were assigned that year. So, before we get into what you did choose for us, what's going on in 1995?
Quite a few different things, and I will try to skim these and not get too down any rabbit trails with any of these little subgenres, but there's a lot of things going on. Off the top, we got some new metal. Very, very early days of new metal. Deftones put out Adrenaline, and then I kind of put some rap rock related stuff in there. Sugar Ray, Orange 9mm, that kind of stuff is going on in 1995.
It is funny that you do always include new metal on these.
They show up a lot.
Yeah, I guess it's the secondary genres more so than the, like, new metal itself is not a subgenre of punk rock, but in some ways kind of, because like one of the things with new metal is there's no solos, you know, it's like it's not like full metal where you're doing ripping solos. Part of that was the limitations of the musicians making the music at the time, but I guess a lot of them did come up on punk music, so that's a big chunk of it. I know the Deftones specifically were like really influenced by a lot of like new wave and goth stuff from the 80s. And Orange 9mm technically falls under the punk category.
Yeah. I mean, they're just rappy post-hardcore.
Yeah.
We got some pop punk stuff here, and it's not a lot, but Green Day put out Insomniac. I kind of just went ahead and threw Rancid under this because it's Rancid at their most popular. Rancid's maybe not technically a pop punk band, but they did put and Out Come the Wolves. Blink put out Cheshire Cat, and also maybe not technically pop punk, but the Ramones' final album, Adios Amigos, came out that year. And MXPX put out Teenage Politics.
You know, I never realized that Adios Amigos was 95. That's later than I thought it was.
Yeah. I guess I've listened to that record recently and kind of deep dived on 95 pretty recently. So I wasn't surprised to see it there, but it does feel later than it should be. Which, I mean, arguably the Ramones broke up probably like 2 or 3 records too late into their career. So
yeah.
They probably should have wrapped up by like 91 or 2. Though that is a good album to go out on, even though it's like a bunch of songs are CJ songs?
Yeah, CJ sings like a good chunk of that record. Though Dee Dee wrote the CJ songs.
Yeah.
It's funny that Dee Dee like wrote a bunch of songs for a record that he didn't play on though.
He hadn't been on a record for a while.
Yeah. It's just weird. I guess it was easy for him to write and he just wasn't in the place to like do it himself.
Yeah, he just couldn't be in a band anymore, I think is what it was.
Yeah.
Adjacent to pop punk is some skate punk, and I debated putting some of the skate punk stuff in the Also Ran section. We can circle back around to that and talk about that once we get to the Also Ran section, but I decided not to, because I felt like in this time period it was enough of its own thing to isolate from what we are talking about. Though I do think to some degree it does inform the record we are talking about.
Yeah, skate punk and pop punk to a degree. Yeah, it is one of those things where it's like, we're in a weird overlapping shades for the main album we're talking about today, which one of these records specifically I think would be objected to by one of the members of the band, but I'll mention that later.
But some of the records that came out in the skate punk idiom, it's actually not a very great year for skate punk in terms of like the bigger names are Pennywise and Lagwagon, who put out records that year. Pennywise put out About Time, which is not a very well known. It's not one that I recognized of the Pennywise discography. Lagwagon put out Haas. I do recognize that one. Millencolin put out Life on a Plate. I know that one as well. You could definitely picture that album cover.
Yeah, those Millencolin album covers are like burned into my mind on how they look, but I've never listened to any of them.
Because they're so ugly.
Yeah, that's what it is. They're just hideous album covers.
Yeah. Probably one of the biggest sounds of the mid-90s. A lot of the 90s in general was just so heavy on post-hardcore. But we've got Red Medicine by Fugazis. We've got 2 Unwound records. They're self-titled and The Future of What.
What?
And Slater-Kinney put out their self-titled record. I guess maybe arguable whether or not you call Slater-Kinney a post-hardcore band, but I feel like, especially with that record, they are enough of one.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're still kind of Riot Girl. I mean, they've always been associated with Riot Girl. Even the next record, too, there.
Quicksand put out Manic Compression. There's a Team Dresch record that's pretty important for them. There's a little ska, no doubt. Less Than Jake, Real Big Fish. There's a little emo, though I didn't see a lot of really standout records for emo. Sunny Day Real Estate put out LP2. Boys Life put out their self-titled record. Braid put out Frankie Welfare Boy H5, which is not great.
Yeah, that's the one you never listen to.
Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, that's where they started. They got a lot better immediately after.
Yeah, very quickly.
Knapsack put out Silver Sweepstakes. That's a great record.
Yeah.
We got some math rock, some slowcore, your Don Cab, Karate, Seam, June of 44. If it were more fun and I was more in the mood for it, I maybe would have considered that June of 44 record, because that would be the one to do. That one or Tropics and Meridians. But
yeah,
I'm partial to Engine Takes to Water.
Which is the one that has like the matchbook sleeve. Is that Engine Takes to Water?
Yeah, I think. Maybe. It's like
I think so.
It's the brown one.
Yeah.
Pretty notably some metalcore.
Some sick metalcore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Fixation on a Coworker by Dead Guy. Systems Overload by Integrity. I have never listened to Marauder, but they put out Master Killer.
I've tried to listen to Marauder. I don't like Marauder, but I will eventually do them on the Metalcore Chronicles once we get to 1995, which, will be a while, but still. I will get to them. 108's good. Integrity's good. Dead Guy's good. I mean, there's some good stuff there.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't, and there's other stuff, like I said, there were so many little things, I didn't want to list every possible entry, because there's just a lot of different sounds, like noise rock. We've got Unsane and Oxbow Records. We've got a pretty strong year for indie rock. I think probably one of the last really strong years of that early 90s indie rock sound.
Yeah, for sure.
Because Archers of Loaf put out VV. I'm not a Guided by Voices fan, but Alien Lanes is pretty well regarded. It's one of their standout records. Superchunk put out Here's Where the Strings Come In, which is my favorite Superchunk record.
Major record for the band. Probably their biggest single off of that record. Eventually, I think it would be like their best-selling record at the time, but then it weirdly gets replaced by Come Pick Me Up. That is a case of the album before was a lot better. Was a lot better there. And Momentum sales keeping it going.
But, yeah, I think that's a pretty decent summary.
Yeah, a lot of stuff there. A lot of different things. A lot of different styles. Definitely a lot to choose from. I thought that this would be kind of fun to bring up maybe whenever we do these. So I was looking at the charts. I'm always kind of curious what's going on in the more like mainstream sector of things. I was looking at the week that this album had come out and just like some of the number ones that week. So number one on the Hot 100, the top singles chart, is Fantasy by Mariah Carey. The number one album on the top 200, the Hot 200, is Cracked Rear View by Hootie and the Blowfish. That album was number one for a very, very long time. It came out in 1994, and it was still like in September of 1995. It's still number one. And then I went to the rock tracks, and Tomorrow by Silverchair was on the top rock tracks, and Come Down by Bush was on the top modern rock tracks. The only difference in those lists is they determined based on the radio play and like radio format, and they would have rock stations and they would have modern rock stations. It was a very weird dividing line that for some reason they just kept going forever, even though they would play a lot of the same things. But because of that, you do wind up with different number ones. So it's kind of interesting to see. But we're definitely in a post-grunge era, for sure.
Yeah.
So I gave you 95. What did you almost pick for us to talk about?
Yeah. So I listed a lot of stuff. And we've covered a lot of good records from this year already. We've done Red Medicine by Fugazi. We've done Dead Guy, Fixation on a Coworker.
Done Manic Compression.
No, we didn't.
Oh, you're right. We did Slip. That's the one we
Slip.
did. 93, not 95. Yeah.
We did Scream Dracula Scream by Rocket from the Crypt.
We did.
There's definitely stuff like Superchunk that we have talked about too much on the show.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I was just not super thrilled looking at what came out that year. There was a lot of stuff like that June of 44 record, for instance. Like, if I were just more in the mood for it, I might have considered it. But I wasn't feeling it this week. Like, there's some Britpop stuff like that. There's an Elastica record that came out that year that I think is really good. And it is not uniformly Britpop in the style that you would think.
Is that the one with their big song?
Yeah.
Sounds like video game music. PlayStation video game music.
And like that whole album doesn't sound like that song.
All right.
They do a lot of different stuff. And it's a really good record. I didn't know how far outside of punk I really wanted to go, though. So I kind of ended up going surprisingly far in the charts and landed on this one, honestly, and kind of almost had to circle back. The record that I did pick, and then kind of circled back to like find some other options. But
yeah,
I did consider a very big record, and could have been fun to talk about. And we've never done this band, but Destroy the Machines by Earth Crisis. That is their debut album. Of course, Firestorm came out before as an EP. I like those first couple Earth Crisis records. I'm not the biggest fan of Earth Crisis, but I do like that early period of the band. And there's certainly an interesting story to tell with Earth Crisis. But yeah, it's also a story everybody's heard.
Yeah.
So what more were we really going to add to it? And I think that's kind of what led me away from this one.
I'm trying to confirm for sure when Firestorm came out. Spotify says it came out in 96. Let's see.
Maybe it was later.
I thought it wasn't their first thing. I thought it was like between records. No, okay. No,
Firestorm came out in 93. Spotify's just way off.
what does Spotify have here? What is this? Why would they have a date and everything? April 27th, 1996. I'm sure there was an edition of that record that came out that year, but
yeah.
Where are you getting these dates from?
The 7-inch on Victory Records was 93. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if because this is listed for Concord Records, is the distributor, because Victory's dead, so I guess somebody bought it up and just fucked up the the dates on everything online.
Spotify dates are wrong.
More than they're not. Yeah. It is funny that the band's most significant record is their set EP.
Yeah.
That Firestorm EP is far more significant than any LP they ever made. But,
3-song EP.
Yeah. That being said, Firestorm's incredible, but...
I also considered...
Come on, say the whole name.
I'm going to.
I typed it out, you gotta say it.
Yeah. Cap and Jazz. Only LP? Yes, only LP. Burritos. Inspiration Point. Fork Balloon Sports. Cards and the Spokes. Automatic Biographies. Kites. Kung Fu. Trophies. Banana Peels. We've Slipped On. And Eggshells We've Tippy-Toed Over. Because despite that name... and who they are and what other bands they've done, it's a good record.
Yeah. I like Cap and Jazz way more than anything the Kinsellas ever did after that.
You could even make a case for their compilation.
Yeah.
Doing that on the show, because it literally is everything.
It's also what I feel like more people were familiar with.
Yeah.
Is the comp.
But that's a good record.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some really good stuff on there. Oh Messy Life, Little League, Puddle Splashers, Que Suerte. That's a solid record. That's a record that because of so much that it inspired, so much that the Kinsella's career inspired, I feel that I have to defend myself in saying that that's a great record. But it truly does hold up.
You know, it is funny. You know, the Kinsellas are really, specifically American football, has been like treated as like, oh, this band is so important, especially on the emo revival of the like late 2000s, early 2010s. And one thing that I've always felt like is, well, you know, those first batch of bands were way more Cap and Jazz than they were American football, because they were all they were all like sloppy and scrappy and rough around the edges. The recordings aren't great. And it's that next, like, little batch of bands that came out after your Snowings and your Grown Ups. And then you got into your Free Throws and your Prawns that are all just like, and we're just going to do American football. I was like, oh, okay. I think it's why we dropped out when we did, because we're not American football guys. And all of those, like, emo revival bands all started switching to doing the American football and less Cap and Jazz. So, yeah, I think that's why we fall off the way we do.
Yeah. Everybody just missed the thrill of that chaotic, ramshackle energy that Cap and Jazz had. That nothing else they ever did was like.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because American football was such a big deal. Like, that record sold so well that they're like, this is what we got to do. That's why all of our side projects sound like American football.
And I also considered, and you 86 this one real quickly, Siv's Set Your Goals. Because you and Dave are going to talk about that record soon. Yeah,
we had literally chosen this like a week before, and I didn't realize that it was the same year, but Dave suggested we do Set Your Goals by Siv for the next episode of Bookenders, and I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. That record rocks. And then you sent it to me as an option. I was like, well, we have a reason why you won't choose this one now.
I was actually kind of close to picking this one. If that wasn't an option. Or because if you hadn't picked it, I think I might have actually picked it.
Well, I mean, there's always room for a third seat if you want to join us for a Bookenders.
We'll see if I have time.
Yeah, that would be time dependent, of course. Especially for all of us now. But all right, well, those are your almost picks. And let's talk about the one you did pick. So, I gave you the year 1995, and you selected Hello Bastards by Lifetime. So stats on the record. From New Brunswick, New Jersey, Lifetime formed in 1990, and they played a style of melodic hardcore with elements of pop punk and emo. In 1995, emo has a very different definition that actually does apply to this record. This was released September 25th, 1995 on Jade Tree Records, and this is the band's second studio album. The personnel is Ari Katz on vocals, Dan Yemin on guitar, Dave Pilatus on bass, Pete Martin on guitar, and Scott Golly on drums, and the album was produced by the band as well as Steve Evitz. So, what made you choose Hello Bastards for us to talk about?
Well, it rules.
Yeah.
It's my favorite Lifetime record.
Ooh. Okay. I would say that would be a hot take, but really it's not that hot of a take. There's like two records that people... Now, if you were like, background, that's my favorite Lifetime, then that would be a hot take.
Yeah. Jersey's Best Answers is probably the more popular. It's the consensus pick, but I've always preferred Hello Bastards. I picked it because I definitely go pretty far back with this record. I was listening to Lifetime a lot in like college, and it's always held up. It's always been kind of refreshing to come back to a Lifetime record, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I really want to do that record. Also because we've talked about Lifetime officially on the show a long time ago, and it was a very bad EP.
Yeah, we covered it on the old album EP format, and we did the debut 7-inch they did.
Yeah, their very first thing that's not very good. Nobody thinks it's very good.
Yeah.
And I thought we should do something good by them, a serious record by them, because they're very, very influential.
Very.
On a few things.
Mm-hmm.
And some things you wouldn't expect, even. So I thought there's plenty to talk about there. There's plenty to talk about with who's in the band. And there's plenty to talk about in the record itself, because it's just very good on its own. So, yeah, that's my reasoning, I guess.
Yeah. My personal experience with Lifetime is I've listened to them a lot. Mainly these two records, Hello Bastards and Jersey's Best Dancers. Those are the ones I listen to the most. The self-titled from 05 is good as well, too, but I don't really go backwards. Most people don't. Most people don't listen to Grip Background or the early stuff, but I've always enjoyed them. They're really fun. They're part of the family tree. The Lifetime family tree is huge and features a ton of bands, which we'll talk about more, too, but... Yeah, important band, incredibly important band, and I'm actually kind of glad that you did choose this one over any of those other choices. You kept saying, like, if I was in the mood for June of 44, it's like, I mean, that's a good record, I enjoy it, but I think people are gonna like us talking about Lifetime more than they'll like us talking about June of 44, so it's a little bit more of a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, I mean, with June of 44, it's gonna be like, I really like how they have all this suspension and dread built up, and the guy like talks, and the bass tone is really cool. Not a fun record.
It's interesting and it's good, but you're right, not fun. This record is fun, though I did hear a podcast talk about it and say they don't think it's a fun record, which I find interesting. Yeah. You don't consider this a fun record? Because it is pretty fun. I guess maybe lyrically it's not like a fun lyric record, but yeah, that's where a lot of the emo comes in. But yeah, so yeah, I spent plenty of time with Lifetime, very familiar with them, and I'm glad because this is now the third like band and album we've done within basically a 2-month span that they're all extremely important, and especially to the early 90s, and were super influential on things coming up. We did the Face to Face episode, we did the Avail episode, and now we're doing the Lifetime episode, and they all feel like similarly important to similar scenes, but not identical.
Yeah. We are, I didn't think about that, but we are hitting on a few different substantial streams, so to speak, that feed into, I think our home base of punk into the orgcore sound.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like there's one more we could do that you have in our Also Ran section that would also, I feel like, be as equally as important. So, what else happened in 1995 that is more closely aligned with the Lifetime record?
Yeah, so looking at what else came out in 1995 in punk that felt similar enough to this Lifetime record, everything kind of felt like a stretch.
Yeah.
But the stuff I felt like I could make the best case for, at least some facet of this Lifetime record, would be AFI's Answer That and Stay Fashionable. Very early skate punky hardcore AFI.
AFI is the other one I was referring to there. I think if we did like Face to Face, Avail, Lifetime, and AFI, we kind of like hit. They're probably the big. Well, I mean, I guess Face to Face is maybe the most uniquely different of those bands as far as what the style of music they were playing. They were pretty cut and dry skate punk, pop punk. Less melodic hardcore, but like the other three, definitely much more melodic hardcore at this period. Of course, AFI is also another weirdo because then they go in a different direction entirely.
Yeah.
Later, but this or during at least the 90s output for the most part, very closely sonically. There's another band I was thinking of, which also is part of the Lifetime story, so I'll save that too. But there is another one who kind of would fit into this same scene.
Yeah. Shelter put out Mantra, maybe a little more of a stretch.
That might be the biggest stretch.
Probably one of the biggest stretches. Civ put out Set Your Goals, as mentioned. It was one that I considered, and I was like, that's kind of actually very similar. Pretty poppy, melodic hardcore. Probably one of the closest things to what Lifetime is doing, but it's more like, dice hardcore.
Dice core.
Ignite put out Calling My Brothers and Family. I feel like that's kind of in a similar lane to Lifetime. 7 Seconds put out The Music and the Message. 7 Seconds is pre-Lifetime. Very influential to what Lifetime is.
That's probably the band in the historically important band from like the 80s time period that is probably the most in common with what Lifetime is doing on this record. But they're a legacy act by 95.
Yeah. And then there's 3 records that I put in here that I think in terms of what they later influence and like what the overlap of their fans are has more to do with how they're similar than how they actually musically sound. Though not a huge stretch, but Seaweed put out Spanaway. Mm-hmm. I feel like Seaweed is such an outlier band in a very similar way to Lifetime in terms of bringing in some pretty disparate elements. I think Seaweed even stretches beyond punk and has like a little bit of that grunge sensibility and brings that into post-hardcore and brings that into more of even just like an influence from 80s hardcore, and is such a hard to define and hard to pin down band because, and I don't actually know what to call Seaweed. Like, I don't think there's a capital letters genre tag for Seaweed in the same way that I don't think there is one for Lifetime. Because remember, we put Lifetime on our pop punk bracket and we got yelled at.
And I disagree with being yelled at. I still firmly believe Lifetime fall under the pop punk category. Some of the members consider it. So the pop punk is a big piece of their sound. So it is not a left field thing. But yeah, we also call Dillinger 4 pop punk. And a lot of people don't like that either. But I was actually talking with our good buddy, the Madball Mystery Caller, and we were talking about D4, which, like we do most of the time whenever we're talking. And he's like, all things lead back to D4 with us, which is kind of true. But I asked him, I was like, do you consider Dillinger 4 pop punk? And he's like, of course, I do. And I also feel like our friend group always considered Dillinger 4 pop punk. It may be closer to the actual, pop punk of the era, but I've also felt like people on, like, maybe just a few years earlier are the ones who are like, they're not pop punk, they're something else, or, but it's timing and when you come into things, I think, is where you start applying terms to it. But
yeah. And I also threw Game Face 3 to Get Ready in here. I feel like that style of emo core is very relevant to Lifetime. And Dear You by Jawbreaker, I put in here particularly because when I was listening to Lifetime, everybody I knew that was listening to Lifetime was listening to a lot of Jawbreaker.
Yeah.
Very close to a circle in terms of Venn diagram fans. I don't know why, because Jawbreaker doesn't really sound like Lifetime.
Not really. But I think if you look more at the lyrics, I think that's where you get a lot more similarity than people would initially expect. And also, this record came out on Jade Tree Records, so Jade Tree in 1995 also released J Church, The Procession of Simulacra. It's got like another like name to it. It's like basically like an extended EP. It's kind of a weird release. I don't think it counts as like a full LP, but also it is. It's kind of weird. But J Church, absolutely incredible band. And then we have albums by Damnation AD, Edsel, and Walleye. So needless to say, the Lifetime record is probably the most important, or the first important record, or at least the first major record in the Jade Tree catalog, kind of leading into what they would become. But up to this point, they were just like another punk label doing stuff. All right, let's get into the story. So one thing that I was doing, I was researching a lot for a long time on this episode because I wanted to kind of get like the beginning of the Lifetime story. And I think this is a case of there's nothing on the internet and the internet's broken for when it comes to researching music. I had such a hard time finding anything. And usually I get lucky and I'll just throw in like, oh, interview, band name, album name, interview. And I usually will get an interview, and that's where I tend to get, like, the good background stuff. Because most of, like, the, like, reviews aren't going to be focusing so much on the story, unless there's, like, a wild story to that particular album. And they'll give a little, like, surface history on reviews online. But, like, even like, feature pieces that aren't necessarily a review, they tend to not go very deep. So the interviews are where you find a lot. There are two things that I could not find anywhere online that I desperately wanted. If I had more time and were looking in advance, I probably could have gotten it. But there is an oral history of the band Lifetime. It was published in AP Magazine. It's issue 203. I know exactly what issue it is. And those oral histories are actually pretty good. The AP Mag, like, oral histories were good because they get everyone related to the band and the labels, the degrees. And they go through the band's whole history. And I was like, that would be perfect. Well, apparently the internet either just does not care. There's like no scans of it anywhere. There's no transcripts of it anywhere. I even went to the Alt Press website and I even was like, can I buy a digital copy? And you go to purchase a digital copy. It says you can get one, but then it gives you an error message, which makes me think they don't have a digital copy to sell you.
You said it was issue 203?
Yeah. Alternative Press 203.
2005 June issue. With Travis Barker, Dexter Holland on the cover. Copies on eBay for like $20.
See, that's high for an old issue of Alt Press. And it's like, maybe if I had time, I could have hunted down but that would require having more than a week to work on an album and an episode. So like, I would love to read it. But there was also another article. Ari Katz did an article for Vice where he was like ranking all of the Lifetime records. And I would have loved to have read that one, but that one's gone. It's just gone from the internet. Vice, I guess, decided to dump it, and then just it doesn't exist anymore. And again, it's not on the way back. I couldn't find shit about it. So I was relying on some interviews, and almost every interview I read was around 2005 when they reunited and did the comeback record. So like 75% of those articles is about the record that was coming out. And talking about their legacy, but like none of those really talked about like the beginning, early days. So I know there's people out there listening to this who probably know the early story really well, but that's because you learned it earlier than we did, and now the internet is useless. So, apologies. I wound up having to listen to an entire podcast on the album. I listened to the 185 South podcast. I really don't like that show. I don't like that podcast. But they do interviews with people, and they did a pretty long interview with Dan Yemin about this album specifically. So, the interview sequence is pretty good. So I got some stuff from that, and everything else I got just as loose. So if we miss pieces to the story, apologies. The internet's broken. That's it. And I just don't know it already.
It is so hard to find stuff now. It has gotten so much worse. It gets worse every year doing this show.
Yeah.
Because websites go down, things aren't archived, and now AI is just making Google terrible.
Yeah. And also, when you look up an album in Google, 99% of the results are just places you can buy it. And it's like, I don't want to go to web stores.
You used to be able to search for very specific things. Like Google image searches used to go on forever.
Yeah.
And now they're like 2 pages and it's not what you're looking for.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much you try to refine the search terms either. You can't find what you're looking for. There will be pictures that I can describe in detail that you can't search Google for them.
Yeah. So, yeah. We'll do the best we can here, but I'll tell you what I found. And really, a lot of what I find is just chasing credits down on Discogs. That's weirdly how I find a majority of my research these days. So, thank you, Discogs. And then occasionally you get a record where there's like no credits. It's like, cool. I don't know what anybody played on this record. But all right. So prior to Lifetime, Ari Katz drummed in the hardcore bands Courage and Enough. He would eventually join the band Resurrection along with future Lifetime bandmates Dan Yemin and Chris Corvino. This band was also one of those bands that had like 1 million band members. They were really important to the New Jersey scene. They are also in the same time frame that a lot of the early the metalcore scene is really popping off in that scene. So I got a lot of stuff kind of associated with that scene when I was looking into like Rorschach, because they were from Jersey City, and a lot of like Gern Blanston records type stuff. So like Resurrection popped up a lot when I was doing my early metalcore research. They weren't considered really a metalcore band, but maybe like 1 or 2 releases. But that's the scene that they're coming out of. They're coming out of a heavier scene. Like the interview with Dan Yemin that I read it was just a heavy time period. Like everything in the Northeast was very heavy. And one of the things he said is like the shadow of New York casts a really long shadow. So that's why so much of the Northeast was just so heavy at this time. So Lifetime does initially form with Ari pulling double duty as the drummer and vocalist of this band. We have Dan Yemin on guitar, Chris Corvino on bass, and we have a second guitarist, Scott St. Hilaire. And the band signed to New Age Records and released their debut 7-inch Dwell in 1991, which we covered on the show. They would follow that up with the Ghost 12-inch EP on Break Even Point Records in 1992, where Corvino would be replaced by Justin Janisch, and drummer Dave Wagenschutz would relieve Ari from his drum duties. Wagenschutz was considered a big deal in the scene at the time, and we'll get into that more in a little second. But this lineup would be the same lineup that would release their first studio album, Background, on New Age in 1993. And following Background, they would go through a shakeup. So they would replace bassist Justin Janisch and guitarist Scott St. Hilaire for Dave Palatis on bass and Pete Martin on drums for the Tinnitus EP in 1994. Dave Wagenschutz would stay on this one. Let me take that clean. My brain flipped words. So bassist Justin Janisch and guitarist Scott St. Hilaire would leave Lifetime and be replaced by Dave Palatis on bass and Pete Martin on guitars for their Tinnitus EP in 1994. This EP is very important to the progression of the band Lifetime. This is the EP where they changed their sound from the background sound to what we get on Hello Bastards. We do still have Dave Wagenschutz on drums, but he would leave right after that EP to be replaced by Scott Golly. And Dan Yemin tells a story of when they were playing like one of their first shows with Scott on drums. There were a bunch of like New Jersey people who were like pseudo celebrities in the scene at the time, people who were well known in the scene, and like were commenting on how they got a new drummer. And one of the things that they said was, this guy better be good, talking about replacing Dave Wagenschutz. And Yemen's like, and I'm sure Golly heard that. So then, yes, this becomes the version of Lifetime that we know and love. This is the Ari Katz, Dan Yemin, Dave Palatis, Scott Golly, and Pete Martin lineup. This is the permanent lineup for Lifetime going forward, and it remains these 5 individuals. The band would wind up signing with Jade Tree Records, who weren't as prominent yet at this point, but one of the ways they signed was they were friends with some of the guys who started the label, and then I believe they just called them and said, we want to sign your band, and they were like, that's cool with us, let's do it. So that's how it went. With the transition in their sound, Ari was telling Dan, he was like, we're not playing this fast shit anymore. We're changing our sound. And Dan now finds that funny because background is much slower than what this album came out to be. This album is way faster than what they were doing. It is very funny. He says is like, I see what you want to do, but I can't write that way. So that's how Lifetime kind of comes out the way they do. Ari is kind of known for being, Lifetime in general, we're kind of known for being a little weird and different in the scene. Like they didn't fit in a lot of the tropes. There's a story about like coming up with some artwork for it. And like Ari was very much responsible for the visual element to the band. So like he had like the flowers on the background album cover. You know, he's doing this album cover, which is an homage to a House Martins record. They use like woodblock prints for like, well, I think the Dwell EP is technically a woodblock print. Ari was very much like, we're not going to do the same thing. And Dan said like, oh, I don't know about this art. And then Ari said, yeah, because it doesn't have a guy with a hoodie on it on the cover. You wouldn't like it. But like Dan Yemin would play barefoot. I don't think he still plays barefoot, but I could be wrong. I haven't looked at his feet in any video footage.
Actually, he might.
Does he? Okay.
I'm trying to remember Painted Black when we saw them.
It was pretty far away. I couldn't really notice his feet. Or I didn't notice at the time, I guess. But they just were different. They didn't fit in with a lot of the traditional hardcore look and style of the time. And this record kind of continues that. You know, they bring in much more pop elements to their sound. They were specifically listening to The Descendants. The Descendants were a massive influence on their sound. And we all know The Descendants are, you know, essentially credited with being the first pop punk band. They still, you know, came out of that hardcore scene.
Yeah. The Descendants also kind of are considered one of the first melodic hardcore bands. So,
yeah.
Still with those blurring of lines.
But they were influenced by, you know, tons of different things. They weren't just hardcore guys. You know, they were bringing in elements from all sorts of different sounds. You know, they were big into like Husker Du, and which appears on this record. And like, but also at the same time, they listened to like Slayer. You know, they were not just like a one style band. So what happens is you bring in a lot of elements. Like in that 185 podcast, they asked if Jawbreaker was an influence on the band, and they were like, yeah. But also, so were all these other bands. So Jawbreaker is an influence. So putting them on that Also Ran list is not terrible. They were probably listening to more of the earlier stuff, but still, I think that's where you get a lot of the lyrics from. Also, Dag Nasty, major influence on them.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of the emo comes in. Is that Dag Nasty influence? But there's a little other Discord elements in there too. I hear some Embrace and some of the guitar work on here as well. Dan says that, you know, if I could just recreate Can I Say, I would have. But I don't. I can't. So this is my Can I Say. So yeah, they were just different from everyone. So they go into the studio at Tracks East in New Jersey with Steve Evans. He actually produced their previous EP, Tinnitus, and so they wanted to work with him again. He got his start playing in the American hair band American Angel, and he was primarily known as working with metal bands. So he did albums for Incantation and Discordance Axis, but he also did like a Meryl record before this one. So he's kind of known as a metal guy. And when he was asked about, you know, Daniel was asked about, you know, why'd you go with this metal guy to record with? And he's like, he was the guy at the studio. So
he did. This is so funny. He did Work Ethic by Dead Guy the same year.
So, yeah, I was going to say, in 1995, Steve Evett also produced albums by the Brazilian thrash band Corzus, the prog metal band Symphony X.
Symphony X. That was the other one I was going to say.
The hard rock band Phantoms Opera, the cosmic country band Solar Circus, the Revelation Records band Shades Apart, and the Jersey power metal band Power, the punk band Transylvia, the post-punk band Boss Jim Geddes, and yes, a little record called Fixation on a Coworker by Dead Guy. Dead Guy, Fixation on a Coworker, and Hello Bastards coming out the same year and produced by the same guy. Bizarre coincidence.
Yeah.
But amazing.
Same guy would go on to produce Progression Through Unlearning by Snapcase.
Yeah.
Satisfaction is the Death of Desire by Hatebreed.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of early Dillinger Escape Plan stuff.
Mm-hmm. I guarantee you.
Under the Running Board. He did Kid Dynamite's self-titled record.
I guarantee
Infinity by Dillinger Escape Plan. Through Being Cool by Saves the Day. So literally does a record that influences a record that influences. entire waves of bands.
Yeah.
And he's kind of just there by accident. Like, he's the guy at the studio. And
he's a metal guy who accidentally became an important punk guy.
Yeah.
Yes, this record features a cover of the Husker Du song It's Not Funny Anymore, which actually comes off of Metal Circus, so I would say that's a little bit of a deep cut. People don't tend to pull from the EPs. The album cover is an iteration on the House Martins album London Zero Hull 4 design, which is a John Yates of the Steelworks design, which we actually talked about last week on the bonus audio.
Yeah, one of those earlier John Yates designs, where he's ripping on Blue Note jazz records.
Yeah. The album title, Hello Bastards, is just a thing that Ari had said. I don't know if they had a punk house, if it was one of those situations where they're all living together, or if it was a case of just like, we just met up here and that's where we jammed and practiced. So they were waiting for Ari to come up, and like, I guess they were excited to do something. They were working on something, and they're just like, oh boy, here he comes. And then he walks through the door and he just goes, hello bastards, when you walked in the door. Funnily, they live down the street from the Bouncing Souls. And they are the band that I was hinting at earlier, who is from this era, the same location, literally, doing the closest thing to what Lifetime is doing.
New Brunswick was like, the New Brunswick scene was like the Laurel Canyon of hardcore.
And it was a basement scene.
Yeah.
It was all basement shows. You know, you have Lifetime, and you have Bouncing Souls, you have Saves the Day, you keep going. Thursday comes out of the scene. Gaslight Anthems, Screaming Females. Like, there are so many New Brunswick, New Jersey. Isn't the Measure from that area too? You know, like so. There's just so many bands that came out of that scene. And it's just because it was a very thriving basement show scene, and it was people's houses. So around this time, Dan Yemin had dropped out of grad school to tour with Lifetime full time. He says, like, yeah, my dads were like bleeding heart liberals, or my parents were bleeding heart liberals, and they were very supportive of what I did. And then they were like, I'm sure you'll do really great with your band, and they're very supportive, of touring. He's like, but it would be nice if you finished your degree, because he was very close to finishing his doctorate when he dropped out, and he was like, no, I do plan on finishing it, but I just need to take advantage of it now. Here's a fun little piece of info. On this record, there's a song called Daneurysm. And then a few years later, Dan Yemin would suffer a stroke, which a stroke is not an aneurysm, but they are, debilitating in similar ways, or it can be, which is wild. He did that in the early 2000s, before Paint It Black. And that's why the album is called CVA, because CVA is like centrovascular aorta or something like that. It's like a medical term, which I never knew.
Cerebrovascular accident.
Yes. So, yeah, CVA. He had a stroke. Wow. And then, yes, lyrically, the album does tap into emo style lyrics. It's a lot of personal stuff, talking about interpersonal relationships. There's some, like, breakup stuff in there, but it's not a particularly, like, misogynist style of emo, thankfully. Like, the lyrics you read here are just like, it's more internal. It's not so much like what Saves the Day would do with their lyrics, or even what Say Anything or bands like that would do. So it's more internally. The song Ostrich Sized features a quote and sample from The Outsiders, so that ties into our Valley Girl episode last week. And yeah, that is the main story with this record. It's a bunch of guys on a hardcore scene doing something different that hadn't been done before. and pulling tons of influence from the West. What they were playing wasn't drastically different from what you would hear on the West Coast. Like, there's a lot more of that melodic hardcore stuff. Though Dan didn't like the term melodic hardcore because he thought that meant Pennywise. And he's like, I don't want to sound like Pennywise.
Yeah.
Yeah. So majority of their influences are West Coast, Husker Du, Minneapolis, DC, Discord, Embrace, Dag Nasty, that kind of stuff. And in the Northeast, there wasn't a lot of that. It was still a very hardcore-centric era up there for a while. And Lifetime really changes that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you're a few years past, the heyday of Youth Crew.
Mm-hmm.
So that more melodic side of hardcore is getting kind of Earth Crisis all over.
Yeah. Earth Crisis and Dead Guy are really dominating the scene up there. And then, all the New York hardcore stuff is still a thing,
Yeah, yeah. The beat down, the tough guy kind of hardcore.
Indecision's doing stuff around the same time. Snapcase is doing stuff around this time. Yeah. It's a different era. And what we hear when you and I come to Lifetime doesn't feel like super different or special when we come to it as far as like something new.
Right.
Because by the time we come to them, we've already heard the derivatives, We've heard the Saves the Days. We've heard the fleet bands that were formed after that. I heard Painted Black before I heard Lifetime, So like,
yeah,
I had to go backwards to get to Lifetime because Painted Black was the current band. I think I got to Kid Dynamite before I got to Lifetime. I literally worked backwards through the catalog. So yeah, when you come to it in the late 2000s, it's not as impactful. But so then you're just going to rely on the songs and the records themselves, which fortunately are fantastic.
Yeah, like if you look at the Lifetime similar artists on like Last FM, it's Kid Dynamite, Shook Ones, Painted Black, Saves the Day, Jawbreaker, Strike Anywhere, None More Black. So like contemporaries would be like Jawbreaker and Sam I Am, and
and that was one thing too that I forget who it was that Ari wanted to emulate, and I'm blanking on who it was that he was trying to emulate, but what Dan came up with was Sam I Am. He was like, I think you're trying to do Sam I Am, but like that wasn't what he wanted, and I'm blanking on what he was actually trying to pull from. A similar band, but not the same, God, I wish I could remember who it was now, but anyway. I don't really like listening to podcasts for research purposes, because then I accidentally just keep referring to the episode, and it's just like, well, then why is the point of listening to our episode? You could just listen to that episode. So
yeah,
I don't like listening to podcasts for research because it sucks, but it was one of the most like prominent pieces of information I could use. There's a Punk News article that was like an interview with Dan Yemin, and it was supposedly like this big like whole history of the band, but for some reason the writer split the article up into two different websites. So the part 1 is on another website, and the part 2 is on Punk News. The part 1 is gone. That website doesn't exist anymore. I don't even remember the name of it. Maybe it's Punk Planet. I don't think Punk Planet exists anymore. And I couldn't find part 1. And I was like, part 1's got all the story, like the history in it. Part 2 was more about legacy and what they were doing in 2005. So it's just like, God damn, this internet is garbage. There's nothing left. So unless you have the mission of going out and collecting every written piece or every magazine you could find, it's going to be tough to find.
And not everything was printed either.
Yeah.
Especially getting into the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it was online.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome to the Luddite cast.
Yeah. I kind of understand why Bandsplain's so much of their research is based on books.
Yeah.
But she also then has to read a bunch of books to like get through everything to tell those stories. So she has to work on those things for months before she gets to them. And that's not the nature of this podcast. So our thoughts are, it's going to be more opinion based than a history podcast. But all right. What did you think? Revisiting Hello Bastards.
Well, my opinion is, it is excellent. Like I said, it's so refreshing to come back to. And I was listing all those bands that like are that sound like Lifetime, and all of them had members of Lifetime or were directly influenced by Lifetime and came later. Like, it can't be overstated how far ahead Lifetime was. They're several years ahead of so much of what punk would be for the next 10, 15 years. And I guess like what that like body of the genre of punk was not quite popular enough. But like when people talk about like records that predicted the future of the genre of music or something like that, it's, you know, around this time period, it's something like Shape of Punk to Come by Refused or, you know, At the Drive-In, and like how that influenced post-hardcore in the 2000s. And like Lifetime influenced that too. Like Lifetime influenced Thursday directly. Lifetime played with Thursday, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
the same scene, very early Thursday shows, you know?
Yeah, Jeff said, he's like, if Lifetime didn't exist, I don't think Thursday would have existed. Like, he points them directly. Now, it's more of the scene that they helped cultivate, because, you know, Thursday started a couple years later, even after Saves the Day. So, but yeah, it's they helped build the scene that inspired so many bands.
But there's so many different, I don't know, it's this interesting thing with Lifetime, because they're like this conduit of a lot of stuff that came before and a lot of stuff that came after. And it's not that they necessarily refined anything or even refracted anything, but so many things that fed into Lifetime come out the other side in new arrangements. And so many people can take from Lifetime a unique influence, and they're not talked about. You know, they were talked about in the mid-2000s for their legacy, but since then, I'm not seeing Lifetime coming up in conversations, and it's a shame. People talking in discourse on Twitter need to be talking about, you know, if people want to talk about Jane Doe by Converge, or they want to talk about Shape of Punk to Come by Refused or whatever, and it's like everything's been said about those records. Go listen to the Lifetime, Hello Bastards, because without even knowing it, you know, I think this record changed my life because what it influenced. And then like I did also come back to it, you know, going back downstream from the bands that I was listening to when I listened, you know, kind of discovered this. And just, I don't think I spent a ton of time with this record, but when I would hear it, then like I knew it was special. There was just something that gave me this like warm and fuzzy feeling. And like I can maybe point to like Painted Black and be very specific in saying like listening to the Painted Black records, seeing Painted Black, like that I can say I learned a lot directly from, in terms of like, you know, politics and attitude and how to like continue to make music and how to persevere and how to not lose your fire. You know, I can draw those lines directly from Painted Black, and that inspiration. It's a little more muted with Lifetime, but coming back to this record and listening to it this time, I was just like a flood of all of that, of like being that kid listening to Lifetime and like knowing it's special then, but maybe not fully able to articulate it until now.
Yeah, there's like an energy. Like this record is tapped into something. There were faster records, sure. Plenty of faster records than this. But there was this passion behind what they were doing that really feels unique. Because like when I look at the stuff that came out in 95, and you look at it, there are super special records that came out that same year, but they're not doing what this record's doing. You know, Fixation, a Coworker is probably one of the best records of that entire year. And for my personal taste, I might even rank that higher than Hello Bastards. But they're not doing the same thing. They're both tapping into like completely different energies, and what Lifetime is doing is like, you're right, fire. That's what it is. It's fire. It's passion. It's this record's short. Like it's you know, urgent is the term that people usually describe whenever you're talking about this kind of record, and it's just kind of like a writerly, you know, trope to use that word in articles and reviews talking about albums, but like,
yeah, it's the smarter version of wanting punk to be like rebellious. Fuck you, old man. Like, It's like it's urgent. The urgency.
But like, I do think it's the right word though, because like they went into this record with the intention of being like, we're not gonna do the same thing we did before. You know, you know, Ari saying we're not going to play that fast shit anymore, but then like it is way it's way faster, the background. But at the same time, like they went in with a goal, and they went in with like an idea of being like, we got to shake it up. You know, we have a lineup now that is more consistent. We don't have a ton of turnover anymore. This is our new lineup. This is who's touring. This is who's on the road. We're spending all the time together. It's the right combination of elements. It's the right group of guys to make this record. Because, yeah, Kid Dynamite and Painted Black, they have Dan Yemin, and like there's some other bands, you know, some other members of Lifetime that appear in other Dan Yemin bands throughout history, but those are different too. Like those are also kind of tackling like urgency and stuff like that, but like it's a different combination of personality. It's a different combination of like ideas. You know, like Jason Shevchuk is not Ari Katz. You know, even Adam Gorin. You know, if you're doing Armalite, I mean, Armalite's not a direct 1-to-1 for Kid Dynamite, Painted Black, Lifetime, but like it's got the Dan Yemin guitar style on there, and Adam Gorin is not Ari Katz. Dan Yemin as a vocalist is not Ari Katz. They're very different. People talked about how like Ari's like lyrics were different for hardcore. They weren't talking about typical hardcore subjects, like not doing straight edge hardcore lyrics. Though even though I think Ari himself was straight edge, I don't know if he still is, but like at some point he was. But those never really manifest too much in the lyrics. He's digging into his heart. He's digging into like his personal feelings, which is an emo thing, which is where a lot of those emo comparisons come from. But even like just the way he like did his singing, like he would break up lines in weird places, and like it wasn't the most smooth verses format, like verse chorus format. There's just like a unique way of kind of like breaking it up to fit the music. Which if you're not, if you're not paying attention and you're like trying to read along with lyrics, you're gonna be like, what? How? Oh, weird. He stopped here in the middle of the thought, in the middle of the phrase. Just because he needed to make it fit the structure of the song, which that also threw people too. They were just like, we can't like sing along as easily to this record as we can the other stuff around the same time.
It's almost like there's kind of this broken, kind of more poetic recitation happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a self-awareness to a lot of the lyrics that I think is really important. There's like some self-deprecation. There's a lot of self-reflection. Like a hardcore band having a song called Knives, Bats, New Tats. Yeah. That could so easily go in such a dumb direction.
And the name of that
song that is about like, I mean, the first line, ever get the feeling ideals can't take us where we need to go. And it's just like recognizing the urge to want to, he says, squash your head. Like, to just want to, like, fight somebody to fix your problem.
Yeah, that song title, Knives, Bats, New Tats, like, apparently that was just a thing that their friend said, and who was a tattoo artist. And I think that's how he would describe, like, the tattoos of the time. And he was just like, it's just a thing he said. It really has nothing to do with the actual lyrics of the song. Dan was like, most of the lyrics had nothing to do with what the songs are about, or titled.
It's such a fun record to listen to, and you have this like you've got Dag Nasty and Husker Du and like Sam I Am. You've got a band that's trying to do like Revolution Summer, but also a little bit of like Bay Area punk. And I mean, there's guitar riffs on here that sound like Van Halen riffs. little Van Halen arpeggios, and it's hardcore, but it's melodic to the point of being poppy, but it's not polished. It's actually very rough sounding.
You know, I do like that we covered this such close approximation to the Avail and the Face to Face records, because those two records are also extremely influential, but they're influential in different scenes entirely. You know, the Face to Face is a SoCal influence, and there were tons of skate punk and pop punk bands in SoCal at the time. But the way Face to Face did it, they were just like, let's add a little more melody. Let's make our songs a little slower. We're not as fast as those bands. And then that was super influential on that Southern California scene at the time. I even think that Face to Face is maybe influential more to around the world, because there's a lot of Europeans who were really influenced by Face to Face too. But then, like, the Avail record, it's like, Over the James is only, 2 years before, right? It was 93? Is that what year that Over the James was released?
Maybe. Yes. Right?
93. 93. Right? No. This says 98. Bah. That's Spotify.
Over the James was... it was 98.
Oh, okay. Okay, I have it flipped in the timeline. So then, yeah, Lifetime was before Over the James. But Avail were already a band, you know.
Yeah, Dixie was 94.
Yeah, so yeah, Dixie predates this. And Dixie, they'd already, like, got to the sound they were going for. It's just that Over the James was, like, the distillation of it. But, like, okay, Avail, super influential, melodic hardcore band. They basically influence everything below the Mason-Dixon line, whereas Lifetime is doing everything above the Mason-Dixon line. It's like a good, like, north-south kind of, like, debate there.
Avail gave us Hot Water Music.
Right.
And Lifetime gave us the Erks.
True. We did. Yeah. You just don't want to avoid saying Saves the Day, but...
Well, yeah. I mean, Saves the Day.
Thursday. There we go.
Already
Thursday.
mentioned it.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of sucks that Saves the Day is kind of... It's a weird one. That's a weird one. Weird accusations towards Chris Conley, and then they just kind of went nowhere, and yeah, people don't care. But, yeah, it is funny. They're doing similar things, but even then, they still sound so different from each other. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of fortuitous the way we covered all these bands. It's so close together, but the songs themselves are so much fun. To me, the big standout tracks would be... Rodeo Clown. I love Rodeo Clown, especially that guitar part on that song. Very melodic guitar part. Really fun guitar leads. The Gym is Neutral Territory is really fun, and that's followed by I Like You Okay, which is really good. Ironies for Suckers is another really standout song for me. Funnily, the Husker Du cover is probably like one of the least like memorable. It's also not one of the biggest Husker Du songs, so it's like, okay, yeah, it's good. It's a good cover, but like, it's not what I go to, you know? Anchor. I love how Anchor goes. Anchor has that like slow down embrace style riff in there. And Lifetime just did this thing, you know, they would do these fast verses, they would slow things down and pick things back up even faster on the bridge, and just like the tempos would vary wildly throughout this record. And it's kind of hard for me to believe that like people were like, you got big shoes to fill, you know, on the drumming, but like Scott Golly nailed it. Like the drumming on this record is phenomenal. The guitar work works very percussively, especially on those like chugging parts of the songs. The bass rocks on this. The bass work on here is a little bit more traditional hardcore bass, you know, just like that do, you know, you give them a chance to shine, you know, drop out the guitars, let the bass do the lead with the drums, but everyone is so good here. You know, there's two guitars here. I think Dan's the primary songwriter, but there actually was a lot of songwriting on there. A lot of the music was written by everyone in the band. All the lyrics are Ari. But the music itself, it was like, Dan wrote a majority of the record, like over half the album, but the other guys wrote a lot of it too. Like there's whole songs that are just credited to those guys and not Dan. Ari has like, you would probably call Ari's voice bad, but I love listening to it. He's such a fun vocalist. The production sounds great. Like Evitz did a great job. Though if you're doing metal recording, you need to be a good engineer. And I think that really does help the sound of this record.
Well, I don't know if I would say the production sounds great. The production sounds good to me. I like the way this production sounds. But like the snare's kind of dead. You know, it's kind of peaky in places. The mix, the vocals get really buried in some places and they're really loud in other places. It's kind of all over the place in terms of mix. The guitars get a little bit muddy at times. It sounds like to me, it sounds like a very adequately recorded live session, which is kind of my preference.
Yeah.
But
right.
Yeah. And like, in terms of like what people were doing with slick and polished punk records at this time period, like, this is not slick. This is not Fat Wreck.
No, but it's not what they wanted either.
Right.
Yeah, that's not what they like. Like Dan specifically wanted to use Steve Evitz because of the drumming recording, because he thought that most like the recordings in the area, like nobody really captured drums well. He felt like maybe he was looking more for like cymbals and tom sounds.
I mean, the drums sound organic. They're not super gated. The drums could have been recorded much tighter, but they sound real. They sound like drums that you would hear in the room.
Yeah, which that was an element that was brought up on that podcast, was talking about how it's like, yeah, the drums aren't perfect as far as like timing and everything, but if you time like synced this record perfectly, it wouldn't be the same record. And you need that organic feel to it.
Yeah, it would be a Saves the Day record. It's the right amount of shitty, I guess, is how I would describe the recording.
Just a little shitty. Just a touch of shit. All right, well, let's do the aftermath. So Lifetime would go on to release their third album, Jersey's Best Answers, in 1997. This is the record that people tend to go to when they talk about Lifetime. It is the platonic ideal of what a Lifetime record should sound like. And they would wind up breaking up in 1997. So following that breakup, Ari and Dave would go on to play in the band 00. And then Ari would go on to play in Miss TK and the Revenge, which is a band that he does with his wife that is very Blondie inspired. And he also has a band called High School Sweethearts, and is currently in the supergroup Beach Rats, which features Brian Baker of millions of bands, most famously Minor Threat, Dag Nasty, Bad Religion, as well as a couple of the other guys from the Bouncing Souls. Dan Yemin goes on to play in Kid Dynamite, Paint It Black, Armalite, and currently plays in Open City, and this is news to me, he's in Bitter Branches now, the Tim Singer of Dead Guy band. He's not on any of the records. He's on this new song they put out, which to me says, we're getting new Bitter Branches with Dan Yemin. Fuck. That's going to sound cool. Scott Golly would go on to play in the band Detournement, and Pete Martin would play in Jets to Brazil as well, but I don't think he's on any records. I think he was just in the band early. Lifetime reunites in 2005, and they released their self-titled record on Fueled by Ramen, specifically the Decadence sub-label, which was Pete Wentz from Fall Out Boy's sub-label. And then Steve Evett would go on to become an in-demand engineer and produce albums from the likes of Snapcase, Buried Alive, Saves the Day, and many, 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 many more, including lots of metal. Well, alright. Did we win?
For sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Totally. Absolutely. Man, watching Valley Girl really... I'm saying for sure way more. Yeah, I mean, we went into it knowing we were going to win before we even listened to it, so it's not like, this was going to be a surprise listen, but man.
Yeah, I was really not anticipating revisiting this record and having it fall flat.
Right, yeah. And I've heard it in recent enough years too, probably this year even, that like I knew what it sounded like, and I knew the songs well enough that I was just like, yeah, I'm going to know it. I'm going to be fine. Cool, we're going to do a good, great, huge record. Let's do it. Yeah, definitely we won. You want to give it a rating?
Maybe like a 4.5?
I'm a 4.5 because I know they can do better, and I do think Jersey's Best Answers is better. So yeah, I'm at a 4.5 as well. It's funny, it's not even a style of hardcore that I tend to go to that frequently, but this one just works for me, Well, alright, I think that will do it for us then. So, I appreciate everyone for listening to the episode, and hope if you were not familiar with this record, that you decide to check it out. It's a great record. It's a classic for a reason. And yeah, you can follow us anywhere on social media. We're at PunkLottoPod. We have a voicemail line, 202-688-PUNK. And our email address is punklotopod@gmail.com. And where can we follow you, Dylan?
You can find me at Husker Dylan in most places. Major Awards Band on Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter. I think it's just, I don't know what the screen name is on TikTok, but you can find us there. But we don't really do much there.
Yeah. There is a Punk Lotto Pod TikTok, but I posted like one thing ever on it. There's too many other social medias to keep up with. I don't know what to do with the TikTok, but that one's a hard one to figure out. I know it also can lead you to some really good, exposure, but TikTok is a little more work than I'm able to do at this time.
Yeah.
Same with YouTube.
It requires so much algorithm gaming and just being super active on the platform to actually get exposed.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. And join us next week for our Christmas episode. So we won't know what we're doing yet. I have not looked into anything yet to decide what we're going to do, but there'll be something Christmas related. So thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.